Chapter 71. Alexis Initiative. Once the teams were loaded, the whole unit began heading back to the city at a much faster than average pace. Sitting in the carriage for the bumpy ride, Dominic did his best to ignore the strange looks that he was getting from the two older generals, who were unsure why the princess had asked Dominic to accompany them. They weren't saying anything, though, and that was just making things awkward. Finally, Dominic chose to break the tension. "So, I don't suppose that anyone brought any ivory polish with them, did they? Gotta look my best for the walk of shame back to the forge." He tapped his horns, and Princess Alexis did her best not to laugh as the pair of stern-faced generals remained silent. Tough crowd. Finally, one of the generals spoke. "Your Majesty, I must say that I hold reservations about your plan. Even if the lineage check comes back with positive news, it's not a good idea to pursue this path at this time." Now Dominic was lost, but the princess was just smiling indulgently at the general. "Noted. But it's bound to happen one way or another. The crown recognizes those with the talent," she replied. Then they fell silent again for hours as the convoy raced back towards the city. This time there was nothing trying to stop them. No signs of goblins in the woods, no surprise attacks, no breakdowns. They didn't even slow down until they reached the edge of the city, and they prepared to have the unit staged at the southern barracks, while the officers accompanied the princess and the tradesmen back to the palace. As soon as they got out of the armored transport, they were surrounded by soldiers, and an officer stepped forward with a silver strap in his hand. "Sir, please extend your arm," he insisted in a tone that said he was not taking no for an answer. Dominic held out his arm, and the silver bracelet was locked around his wrist. Then the soldier smirked. "Well, that's a relief. Most of the time they try to fight when they find out you're going to strap them," he joked, while the princess glared in his direction. They were all escorted to another carriage, and this time Dominic was loaded into a separate one from everyone else, with the smirking guard across from him. "How does it feel to be without your magic, mutant?" the guard asked. "Have you ever looked down out of your window and watched a small dog barking up at you? This feels kind of like that," Dominic replied, then stealthily checked his ability to use mana. As expected, the strap blocked all internal mana activation. But that was not how Dragonkin used magic. At least not their innate magic. But he would be unable to activate any of his spell gems, magical items, or even his trade skill core. The guard looked insulted as Dominic relaxed against the wall of the carriage. He would find out soon enough what was going on. They were headed for the palace, and he was still an employee. They stopped at the entrance to the palace, and Dominic found himself unceremoniously dragged out of the carriage, while the palace staff looked confused. Nobody had said anything about an arrest, so why was a blacksmith apprentice being dragged around like a criminal? Then trumpets sounded, and the reason for the sorcerer being restrained suddenly made sense. The king had come to greet them. By imperial decree, no weapons were allowed in the king's presence during official functions. That meant that all mages had to be restrained, as they were a weapon if they were allowed access to their magic. Normally, they would wear an accessory to block mana use as a formality, akin to putting your storage item in a bag when you could remotely access it to get your weapons anyhow. Locking a mana-blocking strap on Dominic like a criminal was just rude. As the king approached, everyone dropped to one knee, except the princess, who curtsied politely. "Your Majesty, it is an honor for you to come greet this junior princess at the palace gates," she greeted him. "Alexis, welcome home. Are your advisors and guards all here?" the king asked. "Yes, your Majesty. All 10 of my guards survived the incident, and I have brought Advisor Morgana as well as Brevet Advisor Dominic," Princess Alexis replied. The king nodded, then turned and motioned for them to follow. Dominic stood along with the royal guard, and the soldier beside him quickly forced him back to his knees before being kicked in the chest and knocked over. Advisor Dominic was summoned by the king. "I will be speaking to the guard commander about your lack of qualifications." The royal guard hissed quietly, making the soldier turn ashen gray in the face. They followed the king into the palace, and the guard leaned over to whisper to Dominic, "Ignore that idiot." His commander overstepped when he refused to accept that the princess had designated you as an advisor and ordered his people not to treat you as one. It's just a palace power play. Dominic sighed and rattled his wrist. Don't worry about it. Not the first time I've been strapped. Probably won't be the last. He did notice that Advisor Morgana had a custom one made that could easily be clipped on and off like any other bracelet. Is his attitude common in the palace? The soldiers on the line didn't seem to care at all. Dominic whispered as they walked. Not common, but not really uncommon either. It's more of an inferiority complex. With his common birth and record, he will never move up from his current position, and it makes that sort jealous of anyone who is getting ahead. The royal guard went silent as they approached a room full of well-dressed royals and royal guard teams. Dominic was led by the royal guard beside him to an empty spot along the wall, while the princess went to stand in the middle of the room with the other royals. There were two very conspicuous gaps at the front after she filled in her spot in the last row, as well as two gaps in the guards along the walls. A man in a butler's uniform stepped out from behind the princes and princesses and spoke in a commanding voice. Your Majesty, all of the potential heirs have gathered. Chapter 72. Empty Seats. Dominic didn't miss the way that the emotions in the king's eyes shifted when he saw the empty spots in the front row where the third and fifth princes should have been standing. As you must all be aware by now, tragedy has befallen Signia in the last 24 hours. Not only one, but two strong contenders for the position of heir apparent were killed by foreign forces. We have traced the source of these attacks back to the King of Dagos and his advisor, known as the Archmage. That provocation cannot go unanswered. But first, there are commendations to be made and ranks to be reassigned. A group of palace servants stepped forward and placed boxes in the hands of the royal family members who had been attacked. Then the king cleared his throat and began to speak again. There are additional subjects who are due special consideration for their roles in the battle, and those announcements for the commoners will be released in the near future along with the awards. However, there are three names that cannot be overlooked. Royal Guard Jerome, for your role in the protection of the fourth prince, you shall be awarded the title of Baron and a barony estate of your own. Royal Guard Amelia, for your role in protecting the eighth prince, your title shall be elevated to Countess, inheritable by your offspring. And finally, Dominic Wavemates, apprentice smith at the Royal Forges. For your role in protecting the 13th princess, you shall be awarded the title of Royal Sorcerer and the privileges that come with it. Dominic bowed in response, as the others had. But he was unclear what the title of Royal Sorcerer entitled him to. It sounded very fancy, but it was unlikely to amount to much when he got back to the forge in the morning. Perhaps it came with a salary? Many of the titled residents among the palace staff got a lifelong salary. That would be quite the improvement in lifestyle, having two sources of income at once. The king stood and left the room, and the guard beside Dominic turned to him with a smile. I will make sure that the staff knows to keep you abreast of all the mandatory and optional events within the palace, Lord Sorcerer. He joked. Wait, there are mandatory events? The other royal guards all laughed. Indeed. In fact, the same ones that we are obligated to attend as noble employees of the crown while we're stationed in the palace. We might not have inherited a title, but the royal guards still get the basic privileges of noble status. Attending functions, a clothing allowance from the royal tailor, an additional salary on top of our military ranks. Or, in your case, your trade rank. You could also now marry a lady of the nobility without it being a stain on her honor, so be sure that you dress up well when you go out. Many of the barons are struggling to get by with what their barony produces, and sending a younger daughter to a royal smith with the royal sorcerer's title would ensure her future. One of the other guards smirked at Dominic. And, if the city gets attacked again, you'll be expected to fight alongside the noble officers, with rights to any loot you should obtain by your own might. Dominic smiled, and the guards began to laugh. I thought that might get your approval. Royal sorcerers are a bit like the advisors, but with a lower position, unless you become someone's personal sorcerer. Perhaps one of the princesses would like a cute bed warmer once you're old enough. One of the guards teased. I'm nearly 20 summers old. I'm just short. Wavemate's dragon can grow slower and live longer than others. Dominic muttered. Oh, that's unfortunate for you. By the time that you can be the handsome, slightly older sorcerer in the eyes of the nobles, the débutantes will be young enough to be your daughters. Though, I hear that some of the guards are into that. Someone behind Dominic's shoulder joked, and he saw everyone's head turn to one of the guards. Firstly, screw you. Secondly, it's an arranged marriage and she's the only daughter, while I have no sisters. The accused guard, a man in his early 40s, retorted. The guard beside Dominic, who had appointed himself as Dominic's assistant for the evening, chuckled. He suggested that she marry one of the nephews, but they're not in line to inherit the barony, and her family didn't approve. But I hear that she was quietly adamant that it had to be him and nobody else. No accounting for taste, I guess. Dominic chuckled. You haven't seen what young ladies read in their spare time, have you? Older muscular, tattooed royal guardsmen with a secret noble title and a spare club? That's peak romance novel right there. The royal guards burst into laughter. I did not expect you to know about such things. Who has been corrupting the apprentices? Suddenly, arms were wrapped around Dominic's shoulders, and the clang of armor on armor rang through the room. No corrupting the new Lord Sorcerer. We've all got work to do, and rewards to collect. Come along now. Princess Alexis insisted from right beside Dominic's ear. Dominic and the guards fell in behind her, and they made their way up through the royal wings of the palace to the courtyard reserved for the secondary royals. That was the children born of concubines, the offspring of the king's siblings and their families. Most of them didn't live there full time, but tonight, everyone had been summoned back. Princess Alexis stopped them as they entered the courtyard. Prepare yourself for chaos. We had the largest attack by far, and we only have a dozen survivors who all get a full share of the mana cores, with a smaller share to the enlisted and commoner workers who were part of the battle. They have to speak the count out loud and verify it as they hand it over, and it's going to cause some resentment among the other royals and their guards. The other 10 didn't seem surprised by that, but Dominic thought it was a bit petty. Hadn't they gone through hell for this reward? Chapter 73. Reward Issuance. The other royals appear to be waiting for Princess Alexis to go first, as there was nobody at the desk where the royal clerks were waiting anxiously to begin the distribution. The princess stepped up, and the clerk looked relieved. Your Highness, we have your reward prepared. Please bring your attendants forward. The guards pushed Dominic to the front of the line, and the other royals laughed quietly at what they expected to be the highlight of the evening's show. Name? Dominic Wavemates. The clerk nodded in confirmation and set their finger on a line of text. Magical recordings of the battle by Eremos village guards report 608 confirmed kills. In addition, a commendation for rare-grade weapon construction has been added to your payment, as well as your first month's stipend as a royal sorcerer. The clerk motioned to the man next to him, who dumped out a massive amount of treasure onto a pair of tables pushed together. As the rightful share of the battle's distribution, we present 304 mana cores, 10 gold coins for the crafter's reward, 5 gold for a royal sorcerer's monthly stipend, and 12 uncommon grade magical items, randomly selected. Please confirm receipt. Confirmed. Dominic quickly noted, while trying to control his breathing. His heart was pounding in his ears, and he could feel himself becoming dizzy as he collected the items back into the storage device that the clerk handed him. He wasn't quite sure what happened next, but after a moment, he realized he was sitting on the edge of a planter at the edge of the courtyard. Not bad, Lord Sorcerer. We thought for sure you would pass out. One of the royal guards joked. It was a close thing. Dominic agreed. You were definitely on autopilot for a while. But our turn is over now. We can head back. I will escort you to the smithy area, as even now, you don't have clearance to be wandering the secondary royal quarters unattended. The guard offered. Thanks. Pops is going to freak out when I get back. Hell, with this many mana cores, I could likely push straight for journeyman on my trade skill core. The guard laughed. I wouldn't recommend that. There is a diminishing return on doing things that way. You'll want to save it for when you're close to journeyman, and then push through right before a review. Every 3 months, the tradesmen are considered for promotion. If you get a move to journeyman in the first placement, it would be a miracle, even if your core was there. First, they would need a position open. But second, there are other apprentices who have been waiting longer and have accomplishments in the forge as well. Dominic shrugged. Being Pop's apprentice isn't a bad gig anyhow. Plus, now that the battle is over, we should be able to catch up with the requests for new weapons in a week or two. The guard laughed and shook his head. Were you not listening to the king? They found evidence that Dago's government leaders were behind the attacks. If anything, we're likely to start ramping up for a full-scale war soon. Not just the capital, but the whole nation. Once that starts, there won't be enough high-quality weapons in the entire world to fill the demand. As they turn a corner, Dominic recognized the hallways that led to the Master Smith's quarters, but that was not where the Royal Guard was headed. Instead, he led Dominic straight to the smithy. Check in before you retire for the night. It's considered standard protocol to let them know that you are back and will be available for tomorrow's roster. He insisted. Dominic was going to point out that he literally lived with the master weaponsmith who set his schedule, but followed the protocol anyhow. The moment that they stepped through the doors, a great cheer went up as the forge welcomed him home again. Apprentice Dominic, we heard all about your adventure. Welcome home. That grumpy old bastard might finally stop treating us like slaves. The greetings of the forge workers made Dominic laugh. Where is the weaponsmith? He asked, not seeing Pops in the forge. A hoarse voice came from the corner where the old armorer always sat to do his ornamental work. He's down at the barracks, delivering a load of weapons. We didn't expect you to be finished with the formalities so fast. But these lazy louts had better get back to work before he really does treat them like slaves. They're already behind schedule. That chased the workers back to their stations, and the Royal Guard clapped Dominic on the shoulder as he turned to leave. Good luck, sorcerer. Don't forget, I'll drop by in a day or two with the schedule of mandatory events. Actually, I will inform the head maid that you are on the list, and she will take care of making sure that you are ready for them all. Yes, that is much better. Then, he was off, and Dominic headed for his usual station at the forges. Everything was right where he had left it, arranged for making war picks. Armorer, what are we working on today? Dominic asked. Journeymen are making officer sabers. The masters are making lumber axes. They'll need them to cut trees for siege weapons, you see. The old man explained. Dominic looked around and realized that there were no other apprentices in the forge right now. At least, no other apprentice weaponsmiths. Are the other apprentices off shift? He asked after doing the mental math, which told him they couldn't have sent everyone with the reservists. The old armorer smiled. The weaponsmith got sick of their whining and told them that they could either make the deliveries or work night shifts, and the journeyman would make the deliveries. So, we haven't seen one in here while the sun was up since you left. Now that he mentioned it, the journeyman actually appeared to be in a much better mood than usual. Maybe sending away the apprentices was the right call? Normally, nobody wanted to work the night shift. It was just for unfinished work and emergency on-call duty. Getting all the apprentices to volunteer to move over was a stroke of genius on Pop's part, if his goal was to get a quieter forge. Chapter 74. Back at the forge. Pops came back in a moment later, as Dominic was considering whether he should be making weapons for the officers, or mass-producing axes. Likely the axe heads, as they were easier to make than some ornamental blade. Apprentice. Welcome back. I see that you made it back somewhat safely. But I come bearing excellent news for you. You have the next 2 days off from forge duties to repair your equipment after your journey and prepare yourself for the next weapons push. Dominic smiled. Are you certain? I see that you're making axes, and I'm not bad at those. Pops snorted in amusement. I made my 10,000th axe before your father was born. Now shoo. You got plenty of repairs of your own to make, and you will be expected to have suitable formal armor for social events involving the military beginning next week. That had not been in the briefing, but Dominic left the old man alone with his work and returned to his room. His very crowded room, as there were parcels all over the bed and floor. New work uniforms, formal outfits, hats, a new coat. No, make that 3 new coats. Mage robes and even nightclothes, all in higher quality than his standard apprentice-issued versions. It was a good thing that he had been given a second storage device with his reward inside, Dominic realized. Just putting all of this away would take up the majority of the room in the one that he had grown up with, and if he had to consolidate all the rewards from this trip plus all the new clothes, he would not have enough space. But the new item, A plain gold ring with no identifying marks held nearly 4 times as much as his beloved storage cube, despite being a tiny ring and not a palm-sized cube of Magitech. This had to be proper spatial magic, not a Magitech device. Dominic couldn't see any way that the workings of a storage cube could be condensed into an object that small, much less one so oddly shaped. That one had much more space, but Dominic preferred to keep all his personal belongings separate from the valuables. At least that way, if someone robbed him, they would likely only take one or the other. There was also one more advantage to the ring-shaped storage device. If you didn't need anything out of it, you could hide it much more easily. The number of cores that were currently in Dominic's storage cube were as many or more than most smithy workers would be likely to ever have on them, so if he hid the ring, then nobody would be suspicious about hidden wealth. With that in mind, Dominic removed the ring from his finger and carefully slid it on his toe. Once his socks were on and back in his boots, Dominic found that he could actually access the ring just as easily as the storage cube that he wore inside his robes. Why he had associated the distance from himself with the distance from his hands, he didn't really know. He had always kept the cube at his waist, where he could touch it to move things in and out. But in his sock, he was always touching it, and the smooth ring didn't chafe. At least, not that he could tell so far. If it did become uncomfortable at work, he would reconsider his plan. However, Pops was right, he had a lot to do, and that started with repairing his armor. The forge in his room was well stocked, but the cogwork armor that came from his recipe only bore the name thanks to the gear-shaped magical circuit pattern that was emblazoned on the chest plate. There were no other gears involved, and the armor fastened with magic and metal latches. The spell closed the latches when you put the piece on and held it closed until you, or someone else, deliberately attempted to open a latch. The plate he had been wearing was completely destroyed, to the point that even the enchantment was damaged. There was no salvaging that, so Dominic used the metal as a base for the rebuild, and then the supplies from the forge to blend a better alloy which might survive a hit or two. He had a couple of days, so Dominic planned to redo the whole set. If they were supposed to go fully armored to some of these events, he could at least not embarrass his skills as a blacksmith while he did it. Dominic quickly checked his new storage item to see if he had gotten a recipe from among the loot, but found that it was just a collection of goblin and ogre-crafted common-grade magical weapons. So that left him with no other options for armor other than the cogwork plate. He got to work right away, and then realized that he could actually make these armor pieces much better than the ones he had previously been wearing. Crafted equipment relied almost entirely on the materials, especially the mana cores. Assuming that you were crafting an item with that method, and not the mana oil bath. He had a number of ogre mana cores in his storage right now. They were originally intended to be for the creation of the rifles, but they were all level 15 and 16, and the bonuses that they could create on an item were far beyond what he could get from the much lower level mana cores sourced from goblins and hobgoblins. With that sort of upgrade, he would have defensive abilities on par with any of the officers, even if it was still an uncommon grade plate. That shouldn't draw anyone's attention, as it was issued to sergeants and others among the enlisted soldiers, so Dominic didn't see a good reason not to make the armor the best he could. Creating rare items might cause him headaches in the future if they were going to be worn exposed around the palace, but everything under that shouldn't be an issue. Chapter 75. Formal Armor. So, instead of rare items, Dominic focused on making himself durable armor with a decorative chestplate. As his formal outfit was sorcerer's robes, long and flowing, there was no need for the majority of the armor to be highly ornamental. The only part that anyone would see would be the plate over his chest, his gloves, and possibly his boots. But that gave him a great idea. As he was supposed to be a ranged combatant, he didn't need to make a full suit of plates, with all its fitment issues. The forge in his room had a chain-weaving loom in it for doing repairs to armor, as the apprentice's suite was devoted to a master smith, not the weaponsmith in particular. He was about to start weaving wire for a hauberk when one of the armorers passed by the courtyard outside his window. "Hey, armorer, I forgot your name. Care to make a trade?" He called out from his small second-floor window. The young man turned, and then smiled when he saw who was waving at him. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, coming close so they didn't need to shout. "I need a chainmail hauberk or a decorative chest plate and pants, size to fit me." unfinished, as I will be enchanting them for my own use. Dominic explained. And what do I get in exchange? The armorer asked. Dominic held out an ogre's mana core, and the man's smile brightened. Now you're speaking my language. That's a level 15 core, right? Throw in 5 goblin cores, and I will trade you both right now. I've got a training set from when I was a kid, which was never enchanted. Dominic resisted the urge to sigh. I will be right down. The armorer was much larger than he had looked from above, Dominic realized as he reached the courtyard. He didn't even stand as tall as the man's shoulder, and he was only half as wide. Well, you might need to take it in at the side seams, but it should be adjustable enough. It's got short sleeves, meant to be worn with bracers and plated boots, so the overall length should be good. The armorer held up the 2 pieces in question, and Dominic nodded in agreement. Indeed, they were just simple chain armor, the same as the reservists wore under their plates. Thanks. I have events coming up which require full formal military wear. Dominic explained, and the armorer smiled. Wearing a full plate set under and over a robe is a pain because the pieces are designed to interlock and overlap, but they can't if you slap a robe in the middle. So, you're thinking a chest plate over and chain under. You'll sound armored when you move, which is right, and nobody will be able to accuse you of being underdressed. If you can get your hands on some iron pyrite and brass, you can use them to plate a set of bracers and make them look like gold. It's better than having them in raw iron. I don't recommend doing the same to your chest plate, though. Too much gold. Looks gaudy. Are you sure you don't want to just commission a set? The armorer asked. Later. Right now, I need to repair the armor I have, as I've only got a few days off from the forge, and then there will be mandatory events. Dominic handed over the mana cores, which the armorer tucked away, looking wary of anyone seeing him make the exchange. Pleasure doing business with you. Now, I need to get all of this, plus those bracers you suggested, polished up and ready for finishing touches. He quietly informed the armorer. They both returned to their duties, and Dominic sighed in relief as he realized that he really might have a full formal armor set ready before he had to head back to work. A quick acid bath to get the chain ready for upgrade was enough, and Dominic got to work on the bracers while the ruins of his old chest plate went through the cycles of heating and working to improve the metal quality and pound out the lingering magic so the metal could be reused. Once the bracers were shaped, Dominic looked through the standard stamps and found one with the outline of a dragon. That was carefully hammered into the surface of both bracers, and then he went looking through the materials for plating metals. There was a salt and electrode kit for white bronze, which was almost as shiny as silver. That would do just as well as fake gold, and he could polish it on the buffing wheel. The bracers turned out beautifully, and Dominic hadn't even noticed as the sun went down, and then back up again. He only noticed that time was passing as he smelled breakfast being brought in while he was painting the dragons etched into the bracers. Dominic came out to the smell of food and noticed that Pops was laughing at his sweat-soaked and filthy appearance after a whole night in the forge. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked around a mouthful of bacon. "I didn't realize it was morning. I've only got a bit more to finish on the rough shaping of the new chest plate, and then I will go to sleep and do the detail work later. I've still got all day today and tomorrow off, right?" Dominic asked. "That's right. But be sure that at least one of those days is dedicated to sleep. We've already started to ramp up production, and you'll be back to long hours every day of the week." Pops warned. "Got it. No production quotas. Just smash until we run out of materials." Pops nodded. "If we can manage that, we might even get to go home early one day. But I will be moving you off the standard apprentice lines. His Majesty the King has given orders that we are to equip a natural children's regiment of riflemen. You are skilled with ranged weapons, so you will be joining the journeymen in the creation. Make whatever you want, as long as it can be made with the materials they give you. The nobles will learn to live with it." "Natural children?" Dominic asked. Pops chuckled at Dominic's innocence. "It's a polite way of saying bastards and sons by mistresses and concubines. Those who will inherit nothing but a few drops of noble blood and the smallest affinity for magical items." Chapter 76. Needs decoration. Once he had eaten, Dominic rushed back to his room to put the finishing touches on the chest plate. He was using the uncommon plate armor designs from the bookshelf outside, which looked more fashionable, but it was still quite plain and functional in design. So, Dominic decided to add some scrollwork around the edges, stamped into the hot metal with a die and hammer. It wouldn't be as pretty and intricate as what the master armorers made by hand, and it would be repeated every arm length, but it was good enough to make the piece look like it belonged on a noble, and the design of the chest plate was the three-section style which was currently coming into fashion, with a curled short gorget to prevent arrows from sliding up under the wearer's hood. But as he finished it, Dominic realized that he could make it extra fancy without much extra effort. There was plenty of white bronze left for plating, so he could make it shiny. Then he could enamel paint the inlay around the edges and call it done. That took the better part of 3 more hours, but when it was finished, he had chest and bracers that matched, as well as freshly cleaned and slightly size-altered chainmail. He had newly issued boots that were still undamaged and serviceable, so he didn't worry about those, and focused on what he would do for the pieces he had. Pops came in to check on him during the lunch break, and saw the suit of armor, all laid out on a stone table for inspection. "That's mighty fine. Have you decided on an enchantment?" he asked. Dominic shook his head. "I was thinking of using a good mana core, and hoping for the best. It's pretty enough that nobody should give me a hard time about it. I have an idea. Why not carve a channeling circuit into the back of the plate? It will make your mage armor spell more effective, or whatever other spell you cast on the pieces. I see that you already followed the basics of the cogwork plate pattern circuitry on the standard design, so it should self-latch as well. Between the two, it should be enough to push it close to rare grade, or even over the threshold." Dominic gave him a curious look. "Won't that just cause issues for me? I mean, remember what happened with the sword. It would be embarrassing to have someone strip me of my armor at a formal event." Pops laughed. "No more need to worry about that. A royal sorcerer isn't much of a noble, but they are technically a noble, and trying to take your armor in public would just shame the one bullying you. Besides, I heard that the princess favors you. She was the one to put in the good word with the king that got you recommended for rifle duty starting the day after tomorrow. Not that you weren't going there anyhow, but a royal recommendation is a strong sign of future advancements." Then Pops picked up a chisel himself and began to carve the circuit into the back of the armor plate. "Wait, you can make proper Magitech items?" Dominic asked, shocked by the revelation. "What do you think a mastersmith is? You don't get the title just by pounding your hammer. You need to know more than any journeyman and then prove it. A bit of Magitech circuitry is nothing when you've been working the forge for half a century or more." Pops laughed. The old dwarf's knowledge never failed to amaze Dominic. While the circuit was simple, it was functional and would make it much easier to sustain a spell on the armor. If Dominic cast the spell focused on the chest and then let it spread to the rest of his body, it should save him at least a third of the effort of the casting, while making it easier to reinforce the spell after it took damage. This time, he really might be able to take a hit. Well, once he had put a few more levels into his spell book, that was. The Magitech artifact currently held all his spells, while his bracers would hold his enhancement items. Mana recovery, spell power, endurance, plus his trade skill core. Minor skill gain rate increase could be moved to his necklace, where it was no longer visible, but still effective. No need to advertise that one. That made 2 items per bracer, and the blacksmith's trade skill core was easily transferred from his work bracer to the ornamental one. He would need to put a few more levels into them when he had a chance, but increasing the levels of his spells would be a stealthier and more effective way to improve everything but his physical attack power. Come to think of it, the only truly useful spell he had in combat was Mage Armor. The others were Minor Illusion, Alarm, and a spell to purify food and drink. While they were useful in certain situations, they didn't really need the extra levels. What he really needed was some additional combat magic. A few spell gems would be enough. Just a few more ways to fight, or to defend a group, so that he could be considered a proper magical asset in the group. That was probably not the approved way of thinking, though. While Dominic wanted the magic power to impress others, he was truly more valuable to the kingdom in his role as a weaponsmith. Keeping himself alive if he was attacked was more important than what sorts of magic he could use outside the forge. Inside the forge was another story, And now that the basic Magitech circuitry was completed, Dominic knew just what he needed to do to activate the items. Pops watched as Dominic ground the best of the mana cores that he had, a level 20 Ogre Lord core from the previous battle, and carefully coated all the armor pieces he had laid out on the stone table. Why Dominic hadn't heated them to make the core dust integrate immediately was a mystery, until Dominic took a deep breath and bathed the whole stone table, armor and all, in dragon fire. Dominic poured mana into the items as the flames raged, and stopped only when he could feel that they had completed their transformation. Plate of Effortless Defense, a rare quality. Created at level 20. Crushing Chain Suit, rare quality. Created at level 20. Bracers of Draconic Might, rare quality. Created at level 20. Pops smiled as he looked over the pile of shining armor on the slightly melted tabletop. Well, it looks like you will be the best dressed in the room for some time now. Congratulations on the new armor set. Chapter 77. Barter or Bribe. The next morning, the maids came to Dominic's room with a list of events coming up soon. Most weren't planned too far in advance, but there were 3 holidays during the next season, all of which were scheduled, and then there was a war preparation luncheon that very day, called with 6 hours' notice. Full military formal dress was requested, and Dominic breathed a sigh of relief that he had actually finished his gear. "Is there anything else that you require?" the maid asked. "Where do I go to get more nail polish? It's impossible to get my nails clean enough, and I don't like wearing gloves to lunch," he asked. "Was there none in your supplies?" she asked. Dominic checked the storage ring quickly and shook his head. "There is some makeup, likely to hide bags under the eyes, but no nail polish." "Oh, there are gloves here, a number of them. That must be why there is no polish. Am I supposed to be wearing gloves to events?" The maid giggled at his confusion. There should be a chart of clothing requirements in there somewhere as well. But gloves are acceptable for all events, though not mandatory for any. I would recommend scrubbing your hands as well as you can get them clean, and then wearing the gloves. They go with the sorcerer's robes better than most other coats and shirts, she replied with a shrug. Dominic set out the pile of gear that he would need to be fully armored for the event. "Do these often happen on short notice? I'm still new to the forge, and I am unsure what the policy is on leaving in the middle of a shift for a mandatory event," he asked. The maid smiled. "Normally, there are very few of them that are mandatory attendance. Most are voluntary, and the lower nobles are strongly encouraged to attend, but not at the expense of leaving their duties. Mandatory ones like this are more uncommon, and if there is one, you are generally excused from duties for the day." Dominic smiled at the maid. "And, of course, they schedule it on my day off." The maid laughed, then gestured to the common area. "Breakfast is served. You will probably want to talk to your master before he leaves for work." "Thanks for the warning and the assistance," Dominic replied. The maid smiled. "Head maid would have my head if I let someone on my rotation miss the start of a mandatory event. But I'm going to be here nearly every day now. Now that the new weaponsmith is settling in, the head maid has assigned the quarters as part of the regular rotation." Dominic joined Pops at breakfast, and the old dwarf smirked at him. "Looks like you get to put on a show earlier than expected." Pops chuckled as Dominic removed the cover from his breakfast plate. "You make it sound like you know what this meeting is about already," he asked, while trying not to laugh at the way the maids pointedly ignored the fact the dwarf had filled his ale mug nearly halfway with whiskey before adding the ale. "You do as well. It's about the natural sons regiments. It's a big thing for the families with too many sons. There aren't many chances for the discarded children to advance in the world, and now they will finally have the chance to prove themselves in battle. If the war ends well, there is even a chance that they will be able to earn a peerage of their own and become proper landed nobles, despite their more humble upbringing." Dominic nodded as he finally understood the significance. For these nobles who didn't inherit anything, if they couldn't claim a title or peerage of their own, their children would simply be commoners from a noble family, more likely to work as servants of the main branches of the family or get a trade skill, as they were unlikely to see another rise to noble titles unless it was a pretty daughter or an especially talented soldier. Putting your life on the line for the slim chance that you would get some official royal recognition was a long shot, and not exactly the average noble's idea of a good time. Only a few oddballs like the twin princesses and Princess Eleanor actually enjoyed going into combat. Once breakfast was done, Dominic went back to the forge in his room and decided to make a few pistols. He was going to the firearms production group, and while they were making rifles for the soldiers, a couple of rare grade mana revolvers would make for great bargaining chips to get things he really needed, like spell gems. He really did need more spells to add to the book. Everyone seemed to have a great time reminding him he was a sorcerer, and he couldn't remain a one-spell wonder forever. But once Dominic got back to the forge, he realized that there were certainly spell gems in the palace somewhere. He just needed to learn how to obtain them. The monsters occasionally dropped gems. Most of them were turned in by the guards. So logically, there had to be a place that they were stored and available somewhere. Even if they were a high-demand item, the most common drops should exceed the number of people who needed them, as duplicates did you no good. But there should also be Magitech orbs with spell effects available for purchase in the city. He just didn't want to go through the hassle and embarrassment of being thrown out of shops until he found a place to purchase one. Either he would find that place, or he would find someone who could trade him what he needed in exchange for a rare grade mana revolver. But first, he had to make the revolvers to trade. Having done it once, it was not nearly as difficult the second time. Plus, he had much better materials available to him now than the tool steel that he had made the first one from. Not that it was a bad choice. Tool steel made wonderful pistols. But for trade, they would want slightly fancier. Chapter 78. Cheat Code. Dominic considered his options, and then looked over the blueprint that he had for the mana revolver. The actual Magitech circuit that made it reload with magical bullets was not incredibly complex. It took up the majority of the pistol, but as far as the actual circuit, it was mostly just 6 loops designed to put a magical charge on the cylinder and fire when a hammer hit the chamber. Like the actual weapon, it was simple and efficient. But Dominic realized that he didn't have to waste a whole mana core on this. If he wasn't dedicated to making it a rare grade weapon, he could inscribe the circuitry and dunk them in the mana oil with a large measure of his own mana added. The higher grade mana core dust could be recharged to a higher standard, and while that would take more time to recharge between uses, making pistols wasn't a fast process to begin with. He had under 5 hours before he would need to start getting ready for the event. That should be enough time if he could find the jigs to precisely create duplicates of the weapon parts. There they were, tucked away in the main room's storage closets. Dominic grabbed all the jigs, including the barrel rifling core and the mold release agent. With everything ready, he made the imprints for 2 pistols on his casting sand table and prepared the rough blanks. Knowing that you were making a magical weapon allowed a lot of corner cutting, Dominic noticed. For example, he could smelt aluminum alloy, which was much faster and easier to prepare than steel, as well as being cheaper if he had to pay for the materials he was using. If you weren't using actual ammunition in the weapon, most of the drawbacks of the alternative metals no longer mattered. So, as soon as the metal was workable, he began surfacing the pieces and drilling every fitting. But he was still only at the rough finishing stage when the maids came to inform him that he needed to get ready for the event. It seemed that the lowest ranking were expected to be there first, and that meant him. The older of the 2 maids who had come to assist him smiled at the flustered Smith. You can finish after. The event is a late luncheon. It will only run for a few hours at the most. Now hold out your hands. We will get them scrubbed and prepared as well as possible. Then shower, change, and we will lead you to the dining room. She explained. Despite being whip-thin, somehow she still had a motherly air to her. So much that Dominic found himself obeying unquestioningly, just as he had when his own mother had given orders. As promised, they were talented and had grooming tools to get most of the soot from his hands. Then a quick shower with the palace's signature soaps and shampoos had him ready to put on his armor and his new formal black robes. Is this right for the dress code? Dominic asked as he came out of the shower, wearing his armor and black robes. Perfect. Don't forget your gloves. The dining room was on the other side of the castle, near the public entrance, so that the nobles in the city didn't need to pass through more than a few rooms of the castle. As a mandatory event, there were hundreds of people here, and the grand ballroom had been set up with long rows of tables. You just sit wherever the staff put you. It's all arranged in advance by noble title and status, very rigidly structured. The maid whispered as they approached the door. "Thanks." Dominic replied quietly, then followed a staff member to the spot he had been designated. He was seated among a group of young noble merchants and officers, all of whom looked confused to see a sorcerer with his horns showing at the table. "Good morning. I'm Dominic, royal sorcerer and apprentice to the royal weaponsmith." He greeted them, just as the notes that came with the clothing list said he should. "I'm Jack Syra, son of Baron Syra. I run a jeweler on High Street. That's Donald Cooper, son of Baron Fall. He runs the steamsmith across from me." The man across from Dominic introduced himself, and the man beside him. The others nearby just grunted a greeting and returned to speaking with each other. The steamsmith smiled at Dominic. "I don't suppose you have any advance notice of what we're here for, do you? You do live in the palace." Dominic nodded. "I have a pretty good idea, but I don't know the details yet." He was about to continue when a large group of senior nobles came in together, and a uniformed prince stepped to the stage. "Everyone, please find your seats. I will make this as fast as possible, so we can all eat," he announced. Dominic realized that he didn't recognize this prince. Could it be the fourth prince? Maybe the seventh? They all looked so similar that it was nearly impossible to tell them apart at a glance. Oddly, he didn't have that problem with the twin princesses. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I assure you that this is not a frivolous waste of your time. Today we are announcing 2 royal measures. First, the draft will be reinstituted, and every landed noble will be expected to field a certain number of militiamen for the war effort." That didn't surprise anyone. There was a war on, and you couldn't fight a war without soldiers. Secondly, and the reason that this is a mandatory attendance event for those living in the capital, we will be forming a new regiment of natural children. Every volunteer member will be given special training with rifles, equipped with the latest Magitech equipment, and assigned an officer's rank in the military, with all commensurate benefits. That got the attention of the nobles. Even if they didn't have any real interest in joining the army, they knew that there was a chance they would be drafted anyhow, or chosen by their parents to go to war on behalf of their holdings. So, the chance to become a proper officer with Magitech gear, which they would expect to be allowed to keep after the war, was a far superior option to joining the militia. Chapter 79. Who else would equip them? Dominic nodded as the prince finished that part of his speech, but the prince was not planning to go into any more detail than that, and instead pivoted to the militia recruitment that would be expected in the first round of recruitment. "You don't look concerned," the man on Dominic's left noted as the prince finished his speech. "Who do you think will be making those magical rifles for the new regiment?" "That's my new assignment, and I will be starting on them tomorrow, right through the end of the war, most likely." Dominic replied with a shrug. The young noble nodded in understanding. "I get it. Normally, a sorcerer-led unit is shock troops, first in, never out. But as a weaponsmith, your magic is so much more valuable here that they can't afford to send you anywhere else." Dominic chuckled. "I know we're not really popular in the noble district, but damn." The young man belatedly realized what he had said, and a man behind Dominic began to laugh. The man on the other side of Dominic snorted in amusement. "You'll learn to develop a thick skin for these functions. I think it's better that you flaunt your horns. Half the families present have a sorcerer on staff, and the other half wish they could afford one. A sorcerer is just one generation too old to be called a wizard," he joked. An older man thumped his hand on the table. "Enough of that talk. Officially, we're all humans here, and all of noble blood." Then he smiled at Dominic. "Besides, I heard you say that you're on rifle duty. I don't suppose that you have a test piece that you might be willing to trade in advance." Dominic smiled. "How deep are your pockets?" "Because I might have a demonstration model design for the royal guards that I would part with for the right price. As you said, a test unit that wasn't quite suited for the purchaser, but still serviceable." "Let's talk in a sitting room," the older man insisted. They left the table together, and Dominic followed the man into a sitting room, where maids brought in their meal. "Crap, we were supposed to be at a function," Dominic realized, while the man laughed. "Don't worry about it. We're still at the function, just not in the main room. Now, you said that you had an item available?" I have one rifle ready now, made at level 19 enhancement. A rare quality ogre slaying rifle. If you prefer revolvers, I am working on a pair of mana revolvers now, but they won't be ready until tomorrow at the earliest. Quality is yet to be determined. The noble nodded. And what do you want for the test unit of the ogre slaying rifle? I need a collection of spell gems, preferably combat-based. But I will take utility spells as well. What ones do you need? The best stuff gets sent to the Mage Academy right away, but if you are short on the common spell gems, I can trade military merits to get them from the warehouse for you.
The soldier suggested.
My only spell gems are Minor Illusion, Mage Armor, Alarm, and Purify Food and Drink. That's why I need combat gems, so that I'm not completely reliant on my innate magic. But other utility magic would be great. I might be working as the smith, but the next time that they send me out on the field, it would be great to be able to refill damaged steam vessels and canteens, or cast an attack or barrier spell to assist the guards. Dominic explained. The soldier nodded in understanding. That shouldn't be a problem. You see, there is a standard package for the military mages. The ones who can't afford tuition at the Mage Academy, but have the talent. They get recruited to serve with the regiments, and they're all assigned the most common spell gems. Those ones are cheap and plentiful in storage, and I will add a few more valuable sorts to make it worth your rifle. Assuming it is all that you say it is. He offered. Dominic took the rifle from his storage cube and placed it on the low table between them. Oh, well, now that is a beauty. Now I understand why you would ask for multiple spell gems in exchange. It is certainly worth it. He rang a bell, and a maid came in to see what they needed. The soldier quickly wrote up a list and handed it to her after stamping it with wax and his sigil. Be a dear and go grab that for me so we can complete this transaction before the luncheon ends. Yes, General Merlot. The maid ran off while the general examined the rifle. What was this chambered for? He asked curiously. The standard .30 caliber lead balls. It stamps them to precise shape when they're chambered, and the enchantment adds projectile speed and impact force. The side lever charges the compressed air, good for 10 shots, the same as the ammunition capacity. The trigger guard lever loads the next round. The recharge time is a bit long, as it takes some work to pressurize the chamber. But when it's freshly loaded, 2 shots a second on target was no problem for the Princess Royal Guards. Dominic informed him with a smile. So, they did get to use them, then? General Merlot asked. To great effect. I don't know if you heard how Princess Alexis' trip went, but things got intense. Dominic sighed. You were with them? And you're still thinking of going into combat again? I must say that I admire your guts. After their first defeat, most of the survivors need months of rehabilitation before they're mentally ready to go to war again. Dominic shrugged. I am something of a realist. If they call, I won't be able to say no either way, so it's better if I am ready to go. General Merlot smiled. That's the spirit. The maid should be back in just a minute with your goods. The storeroom is only a minute's walk from here. Chapter 80. Spells added. The maid did return in only a few minutes, carrying a wooden box in her hands, as if it were a poisonous snake she was eager to get rid of. She set the box on the table and retreated away as quickly as possible, which made even the general suspicious about what was in the box. Dominic activated Mage Armor and delicately flipped the lid on the box open. The interior held 6 round balls, all perfectly mundane as far as Magitech items went. But Dominic didn't sense any traps, and nothing jumped out at him. General Merlot chuckled. Oh, I get it now. They sent us an actual recruit box. This box is their final exam in a way. You see, if they don't have enough affinity for magic and the spell gems, they will take backlash. You just have to twist open the orbs, and the gems are inside. Then, the general placed 2 more items on the table. A Magitech orb of Create Munitions, which would create lead balls or pistol cartridges when imbued with mana. And a spell gem of a Chain Lightning. Dominic smiled and accepted the items. Once they were safely in his storage, Dominic looked at the 6 orbs, wondering what military mages got that wasn't from the academy training. The first twisted open to reveal an area barrier spell. That would definitely be something that Dominic could use in the future. Even if he could only protect his own forge, it would be worth the effort. The next was Fireball, the tried and true classic of military magic. Then Group Stamina Refresh, Create Water, Campfire, and Repair Item finished out the boxes. Impressive! You didn't take any backlash at all. You must have exceptional magical talent, Royal Sorcerer Dominic. I know they're not the most glorious of spells, but they are precisely what a military mage needs. General Merlot insisted. Dominic stared at the 6 gems before placing them in his storage cube. If you have to give spell gems for these practical spells to military mages after they graduate the academy, what do they even learn there? Dominic asked. The general burst into laughter, and the maids did their best to hide their amusement. Nothing useful. Mostly, the mage academies teach magical item creation and arcane magic. Like mana golems, levitation, teleportation, flying, grand arcane circles of doom. That sort of thing. Dominic chuckled. And nowhere in that do they learn to make a campfire? The general got a weary look on his face. Have you noticed how few of them are with the army? There is a reason for that. We don't actually want them, they're useless. They can light candles all through a ballroom with a flick of their fingers, but creating a durable magical fire that doesn't use wood is beneath them. After all, they can just order a commoner to get firewood. Mages are all noble by default once they get their title, after all. Much like yourself, Lord Sorcerer. But without the practical common sense you managed to retain as a weaponsmith. Dominic chuckled. I wonder if I can get one of them to teach me the grand arcane circle of doom? Maybe I can summon an army of demons to assist us in battle. General Merlot laughed as he speared a potato on his plate. Wouldn't that put a burr up their britches? The mages hate the warlocks with a passion because they cheat and borrow power from others. But between you and me, even the technomages and arcanists look down on most of the mages. Everything that they can do, a magitech device can do better, with less effort. The mages just don't need all the fancy tools to do the task. They finished their meal in peace, and then returned to the main room, where the staff was about to bring out dessert. Their seats were still empty. Keeping to everyone's formal seat assignment was a serious thing, Dominic realized. But it also served to highlight the number of people who had left for one reason or another before the luncheon was over. It was only 24 or so in total out of hundreds, but the empty seats were glaringly obvious. When the dessert came out, so did the prince, along with a group of clerks with notepads. General Merlot chuckled grimly. Oh, I get it now. The reason this was a mandatory event, so that they could verify everyone's physical state on the day of the draft. I would wager that the majority of the men in this room will be under my command soon enough, or one of the other generals in the room. The clerks didn't say anything as they passed by, though they did give Dominic a strange look. But the prince didn't wait for them to finish before he went back to the stage and made another announcement. Those chosen to join the Natural Sons Regiment will be notified by official mail within the week. Please do not stray far from home, as the Royal Mail Service will probably be seeking you or your parents. Those of you who are craftsmen, there is no need to fear for your shops. Even if you are drafted, the most probable outcome is that your work will simply change customers. Now, I have an update on the military situation that you should all be aware of as citizens of Signia. The Dago's army has approached the border, 300,000 men strong, and they have a regiment of airship paratroopers with them. The draft will be expedited, as will the equipping and training. Those of you with family peerages near the border, please send messages home, as the Royal Mail may be targeted to keep the barons unaware of enemy troop movements. For those who are not called upon to serve, you may still volunteer and gain an additional bonus for your courage and patriotism. The prince announced. A few of the gathered young men chuckled, and the prince smiled. He knew as well as they did which ones would be volunteered by their families for the draft. So, they might as well sign up in advance and get the bonus.